Listen carefully, because the most dangerous part of the headline, China just exposed America's military secrets to Iran, is not whether every leaked detail is confirmed on day one. The most dangerous part is simpler and colder. The system that could make it true is no longer rare. It's normal. It's the predictable output of a world that has entered a new phase: financial overextension, technological diffusion, and intelligence warfare collapsing into a single machine. Here's the authority check that tells you why this accelerates from here. Global debt has risen to nearly $346 trillion, roughly 310% of global GDP, based on Institute of International Finance data reported by Reuters, and in the U.S. The Congressional Budget Office has warned deficits remain structurally large, with federal debt projected to keep rising over time. That is not a finance trivia fact. That is pressure. Pressure changes behavior. Pressure changes oversight. Pressure changes what gets ignored. Pressure changes what gets outsourced. Pressure changes what gets patched instead of rebuilt. And when pressure rises high enough, the world learns the same rule. You don't have to beat the strongest power in open battle if you can weaken its decision-making under stress. Now lock in the inevitability statement, because this is where people get uncomfortable. If a heavily leveraged superpower must maintain global dominance while paying rising interest costs, while running permanent security commitments, while living inside a technology ecosystem that leaks by default, then exposures stop being freak accidents. They become mathematically inevitable, not because leaders are stupid, because the machine is built to leak. And once you understand the machine, you stop asking the naive question, did China really expose secrets to Iran? Oh, as if this is a one-time scandal. You start asking the only question that matters. What stage of the pattern are we in, and what comes next? Stay with me, because by the end, I'm going to give you one simple diagnostic, one question you can ask about any headline like this that tells you whether we're watching a temporary embarrassment or the start of a structural shift in power. Now, no hype, no vibes, just mechanism. Here's the pattern. It repeats across history whenever power expands faster than control. First, the setup. A dominant state builds an advantage: industrial, financial, military, technological, or all four at once. It builds institutions, alliances, supply chains, intelligence networks. It accumulates trust, and it accumulates dependence, because scale requires complexity, and complexity requires many hands. In the setup phase, the advantage feels stable. The leadership believes the system is secure, and because it is secure, it starts to stretch. Next, expansion and overextension. More bases, more commitments, more spending, more promises, more global responsibility. The economy becomes more financialized. The bureaucracy becomes thicker. The security apparatus grows larger and more distributed. The contractor ecosystem expands. The partners expand. The data pipes multiply. This is where the hidden cost is born. The more complex the empire, the more surfaces it has. More surfaces means more points of failure. More points of failure means more leverage for enemies. Then comes the crisis of control. A shock hits: war, recession, inflation, political fragmentation, leadership churn, institutional decay. The system gets stressed. Under stress, it makes trade-offs it would never make in calm times. This is where secrets slip, not always as a dramatic traitor with a briefcase, but through budget constraints, cyber intrusion, supplier compromise, allied leakage, bribery, blackmail, and plain old data sprawl. In the crisis phase, the empire still looks powerful, but it's reacting instead of shaping. It's patching instead of building. It's managing narratives instead of managing realities. And finally, the inevitable outcome. The advantage that was once exclusive becomes shared, copied, or neutralized. The empire does not lose in one cinematic collapse. It loses in a more humiliating way. It discovers that its best tools no longer guarantee control because the world learned how they work. And once the world learns how they work, it can build around them, price fear into them, or deny their use. That's the chain. Overextension creates complexity. Complexity creates leakage. Leakage creates parity. Parity creates risk. Risk creates hesitation. And hesitation is where dominance goes to die. Now I want you to notice something about that pattern. It doesn't require a single villain. It doesn't require a single betrayal. It doesn't even require incompetence. It requires one thing only: scale. Big systems leak. Now we prove it 3 times, fast but detailed, because proof is what upgrades a theory into a lens. Case 1, the atomic monopoly that didn't last. In the early 1940s, the United States builds the Manhattan Project, an industrial scientific mobilization on a scale the world had never seen. The advantage is real. The US reaches nuclear weapons first, and for a moment, that monopoly feels like the final lock on global power. But wartime urgency creates the second stage automatically. Speed and secrecy collide with scale. Thousands of people are involved. Multiple sites, multiple contractors, allied scientists, shared research pipelines. In other words, A massive surface area. Then crisis and control failure arrive like gravity. War is chaos, and chaos is the natural habitat of espionage. The prize is enormous. The pressure is intense. The incentives are brutal. Klaus Fuchs, a physicist involved in the project's orbit, passes critical information to the Soviet Union. He's arrested and convicted later, but the damage isn't undone. And then the inevitable outcome arrives. The Soviet Union detonates its first atomic bomb in 1949, earlier than many American leaders expected. The monopoly ends. The world's strategic physics change overnight. Deterrence replaces dominance. Notice what happened. America didn't lose because it failed to build the weapon. America lost the monopoly because scale and urgency made perfect control impossible. That is the machine. Case 2, the invisible betrayal that rewired naval power. This one matters because it touches the nervous system of military dominance, communications. During the Cold War, the United States builds a global navy and the cryptographic architecture to coordinate it. Secure communications are not a supporting detail. They are the bloodstream of command and control. Then expansion kicks in. More deployments, more messages, more devices, more codes, more people handling sensitive material across many commands, more surface area. Then the crisis phase appears through something people hate admitting: human pressure points. John Anthony Walker Jr., a U.S. Navy warrant officer, begins spying in 1967. For years, he provides material that helps the Soviet Union read encrypted naval messages. He's arrested in 1985, but the timeline is the horror. Nearly 2 decades. 2 decades of compromised signals. 2 decades where the Soviet Union could better understand U.S. naval patterns, adapt, and reduce the operational uncertainty that America assumed it held. And what's the outcome? You don't need to sink the fleet if you can see the fleet. You don't need to win every battle if you can raise your enemy's operational risk and lower their confidence. That is what cryptographic compromise does. Again, not one cinematic collapse. A system neutralized by leakage over time. Case 3, the technology transfer that builds tomorrow's rival. This one is modern, messy, and uncomfortable because it sits exactly where today's system is most vulnerable, the border between business and national security. The United States dominated advanced aerospace and satellite industries for decades. Launch technologies, guidance, reliability engineering. These were commercial assets, yes, but also dual-use advantages. Then expansion and globalization change incentives. Firms chase markets. Competition squeezes timelines. Speed to profit competes with security controls. Oversight becomes a constant chase, not a firm boundary. Then crisis and control failures emerge through gray zones, technical assistance, shared troubleshooting, partnerships, supply chain exposure, and yes, cases where regulators later argued lines were crossed. And the outcome is never, they stole everything. The outcome is more subtle and more dangerous. A rival improves faster than expected. A gap closes sooner than predicted. Systems become less one-sided. Again, not one betrayal. A system that gradually shares what it once controlled. Now take a breath, because this is the pivot. 3 different eras, 3 different domains: nuclear physics, cryptography, aerospace, same machine. So now we apply it to the present, step by step, with the same cold logic. First, the setup in the present. After World War II and through the Cold War, the U.S. built the modern order. Alliances, bases, intelligence sharing arrangements, technology ecosystems, and a global dollar-centered financial architecture that amplified American influence. It built the most advanced military-industrial capacity on Earth. Check. Now expansion and overextension. This is not a partisan statement. It's arithmetic. Global commitments expanded. Costs expanded. Security spending expanded. Cyber defense became permanent. The intelligence ecosystem became more distributed. The defense supply chain became more global. The number of private contractors touching sensitive work multiplied. The number of devices, endpoints, and software dependencies exploded. And then the financial layer tightened the trap. Global debt near $346 trillion and structurally large U.S. Deficits increased the pressure to do more with less, to outsource, to accelerate, to patch, to accept risk that would have been unacceptable when the system had slack. Verified. Now we reach the crisis of control in the present, where today's headline lives. Here is the part you must understand. Whether the specific claim, China exposed America's military secrets to Iran, is confirmed in the exact form circulating online or not, the environment that could produce it is fully mature. Because modern secrets aren't just documents. They are patterns. They are signatures. They are metadata. They are timing. They are communications resilience. They are radar coverage and electronic warfare behavior. They are software dependencies. They are supply chain relationships. They are the small, repeatable habits of a system at scale. And here's the brutal truth. You can expose a military without ever holding its highest classified file if you can map how it moves, how it talks, and how it reacts. Let me make that practical. If an adversary can help Iran understand the rhythm of U.S. deployments, where assets tend to show up first, what kind of signaling comes before escalation, what systems are used to surveil certain corridors, then Iran doesn't need a perfect blueprint. It needs enough to narrow uncertainty. Because uncertainty is what makes deterrence work. When uncertainty shrinks, cheap tactics become more effective. Drone swarms become more dangerous. Missile salvos become more persuasive. Ambush strategies become more confident. Psychological pressure becomes more credible. This is why exposure today is not a single event. It's a gradual reduction of your enemy's fog. And in modern conflict, the side that reduces fog often wins without firing first, because the other side hesitates. Now stay with me, because this is the retention hinge. This is where most videos lose people. They drift into vague doom. We're not doing that. We're going to pinpoint what Stage 4 looks like specifically in the modern US-China-Iran triangle. Stage 4 does not have to look like a battlefield loss. It can look like something quieter and strategically worse. It looks like the slow neutralization of American freedom of action. Because when adversaries can see more, predict more, and threaten more cheaply, the cost of using expensive American assets rises. The political risk rises. The escalation risk rises. Markets price fear faster. Allies hedge earlier. Commanders become cautious about putting high-value platforms into environments where their survivability is less certain. And once caution becomes policy, you've entered a new world, a world where dominance exists on paper, but not in the corridor where decisions must be made. That is how empires lose their edge in the modern era, not by being defeated in one war, but by being forced to operate inside a narrower and narrower corridor. Now let me re-hook you with a hard question. If this system is built to leak, why doesn't it leak equally for everyone? Why doesn't every power collapse the same way? Here's the answer, and it's the uncomfortable part. Because the biggest power has the biggest surface area. The dominant power has the widest responsibilities. The dominant power builds the largest networks, and the largest networks, by definition, have the most points of failure. That means the strongest power is often the most exposed power, not because it is weak, because it is large. Now, I'm going to give you the single diagnostic I promised earlier, the one question that predicts whether the next exposure becomes a temporary scandal or a structural turning point. Ask this: is the system reducing complexity or adding complexity? If you see reforms that genuinely reduce surfaces, tighten supply chains, shrink dependency webs, simplify architectures, limit contractor sprawl, unify security standards, cut unnecessary commitments, then leaks can be managed. Painful, but manageable. But if what you see is the opposite, more commitments, more distributed systems, more vendors, more endpoints, more rushed deployments, more temporary workarounds that never get fixed, then the pattern is not reversing. It is accelerating. And in an accelerating system, you don't need to predict the exact next leak. You only need to predict that there will be one. Now let's do the cold audit sequence, because this is where certainty comes from. Highly leveraged global system? Yes. Nearly $346 trillion in global debt. Check. U.S. fiscal trajectory that keeps pressure high? Yes. Verified. Geopolitical environment where U.S. China intelligence competition escalates? Yes. Check. Technology environment where dual-use knowledge is hard to contain and the boundary between classified advantage and open-source capability shrinks? Yes. Undeniable. Middle East? Theater where information, surveillance, and denial capabilities matter as much as raw firepower? Yes. Check. So, what comes next is not a mystery. It is the next stage of the pattern. You will see more exposures, more compromises, more sudden adversary competence, and more uncomfortable moments where American systems behave as if they're being watched, because they are. And you will see debates that miss the point, because they get stuck arguing whether one specific incident is true, instead of recognizing that the machine makes incidents like this inevitable over time. Now the final warning, because this is where people talk themselves into sleep. They will say, this time is different. They will say, American exceptionalism. They will say, technology will save us. But technology is not salvation when it diffuses. Technology is not a shield when your adversary can buy similar tools, steal similar methods, or neutralize your advantage by making you hesitate. They will say, the U.S. has always faced spies. Yes, and that is exactly the point. Spies are not the anomaly. Spies are the tax you pay for scale. And the bigger your system becomes, the higher the tax gets, until you can no longer afford the illusion of perfect control. So here's the practical takeaway, without panic. Stop watching geopolitics like a sports game. Who's up, who's down, who won the week. Start watching it like a systems engineer. Watch for complexity, watch for surfaces, watch for incentive misalignment, watch for rushed procurement, Watch for contractor sprawl. Watch for supply chain dependence. Watch for temporary workarounds that become permanent. Because if you can identify where the surface area is expanding, you can predict where the next exposure is most likely to emerge before the headlines arrive. And mentally, this matters. Don't let the news cycle hypnotize you into thinking every new scandal is random. If you understand the machine, you understand that randomness is often just pattern you haven't recognized yet. Now here's what I want you to do. If you want to understand how this machine was built, how debt pressure, tech diffusion, and intelligence warfare fused into one system, subscribe. Because in the next video, we're going deeper into the most important question of the next stage. When secrets become temporary and deterrence becomes psychological, what replaces traditional dominance? And more urgently, what happens when the world stops fearing your power and starts pricing your hesitation? Subscribe and watch the next one, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And the people who see it early are the ones who don't get caught under it when it drops.